You know when you were a kid at school and it would be break time and you all pile into the lunch hall during, lunch, and everyone's pulling out their different treats? Someone might have, I don't know, a Twix. Some person might end up with a penguin bar. Unlucky, mate. And you're just pulling out all other host of chocolatey or sometimes savoury and sweet items. Well, sometimes I like to imagine Nintendo and Sony all sat around the metaphorical lunch table, and someone's looking at other people's games, and one person is brave enough to think, yeah, I fancy myself a bit of that. Hi everyone, it's Aaron from Push Square here, and today we'll be looking at 10 ex-Nintendo games that eventually came to PlayStation, via pinching or otherwise. This video was somewhat inspired by the news last week that the CASTLEVANIA Advanced Collection was in fact coming to PlayStation 4. Yep, you heard that correctly, the CASTLEVANIA Advanced Collection, as in the Game Boy Advance, is playable on PlayStation 4. What a time to be alive. This got me thinking though, what else has PlayStation seemingly pinched and picked over the years? From the house of Mario, that is. But before I tell you what I came up with, let's establish a few ground rules. So first, rule number one is that the game has to either be originally launched on or closely associated with a Nintendo console. And the next rule is that it must be the original version of the game coming to newer platforms, in this case PlayStation. Hence why the recently announced remake of ActRaiser Renaissance, won't be included on this list. That's not the original version, it is in fact a ground up remake, although I will say that remasters are fine, because at the end of the day, we're going from Nintendo consoles, historically lesser powered than other systems, all the way up to PlayStation, so I'll accept remasters in the following list. Right, with that out of the way, it's time to analyse what were once Nintendo exclusive games, now playable on Sony consoles. Alongside a whole host of other platforms sometimes. Probably too. Starting out cheating a bit ever so slightly, I'd be remiss not to cover the game, or games as it just so happens to be, that inspired this list right away. CASTLEVANIA Advanced Collection, it still tickles me now, comprises of 3 classic Konami games that were previously only playable on, you guessed it, the Game Boy Advance. No surprises there. CASTLEVANIA Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, and Aria of Sorrow all released in 2001, 2002, and 2003 respectively for Nintendo's handheld. And aside from the first game being painfully hard to see due to the original Game Boy Advance's lack of a screen backlight, it makes sense that all 3 of these Metroidvania cult classics are now on PS4, seeing as they directly pull inspiration from a PlayStation heavyweight in a little game called Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Some players have even been known to argue that Harmony of Dissonance is better, but, well, we'll just leave them be. To put it bluntly, Konami re-releasing all 3 of these pixel-perfect adventures on PS4 via CASTLEVANIA Advanced Collection is a win for everyone. A trilogy that was previously stuck on one platform has since come elsewhere, 20 years after they originally launched, to be enjoyed by a new generation of players. The collection itself has been nicely executed too, with the PS4 version featuring multiple screen modes alongside extra save and load options. If you're anything like me, you'll certainly need them. From one Nintendo handheld to another, the next game on this list holds a very special place in my heart. Not only because I'm a massive Resident Evil fan going way back, but also because Revelations was the entry that returned Capcom's storied franchise to true survival horror. Sorry Resident Evil 6 stans, if indeed there are any out there. The original version of Resident Evil Revelations released fairly early on in the Nintendo 3DS's lifecycle in 2012. And to this day, the graphics on this thing continue to amaze me. It was clear Capcom was fully on board with the 3D screen gimmick, using another game, Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D, as a testbed for the tech, before going on to deliver a full-fledged Resident Evil experience with the first Revelations game. Exploring the Queen Zenobia as both Jill and Chris is genuinely suspenseful still to this day. That's why I was ecstatic to see the game get a second life with a PS3 release just 1 year later in 2013. Resident Evil Revelations eventually received yet another remaster release for PS4 just a couple years ago in 2017. And don't think I'm kidding when I say that I honestly believe it's hard for people to tell that this version originally started out life as a handheld game. The game's chapters and many locations you visit are generally more bite-sized in both dimensions and length, but this only helps reinforce the claustrophobic brand of horror Resident Evil Revelations intended to provide. This next one was a nice surprise indeed, because while TT Games generally don't have a habit of buying into platform exclusivity, for its first LEGO platformer not based on a pre-existing license, LEGO City Undercover remained a Wii U exclusive from its original launch in 2013 all the way up until recently in 2017. A good thing it finally came to PlayStation 4 too, as it really shows the freedom and ideas that TT Games can provide when it's not being slavish to IPs like Star Wars, The Incredibles, and Marvel superheroes, as good as those games still are. LEGO City Undercover, for those unaware, is an open-world adventure centered on the exploits of city cop Chase McCain. The entire game is a homage, or in some cases a send-up of, other bouts of police, crime and buddy cop fiction, which turns out to be a great premise for a block-based title such as this. It doesn't stray away from the explore environments and hit things formula that LEGO games do so well too much, but it's still one of the series' jewels in the crown that doesn't often get talked about. If you have a PlayStation 4 or 5, get out there and solve some crime in this former Wii U exclusive. Speaking of Grand Theft Auto, or at least games that heavily riff on the open-world Metropolis concept, developer Rockstar surprised everyone by launching an exclusive GTA game on the Nintendo DS in March of 2009. Wow, was it that long ago? I am so old. Even today, it's impressive that such a detailed and fateful world was squeezed onto such a small screen, or screens in this case, with Chinatown Wars serving as a clear harken back to the DMA design originals back on PlayStation 1. Luckily, despite cel-shaded graphics and an emphasis on touch controls, PlayStation owners didn't have to wait too long to experience Chinatown Wars' brand of criminal escapades and top-down driving, as the game eventually made its way onto the PlayStation Portable just 7 months later. Yes, it released that very same year. It's almost like Rockstar knew how awesome the PSP was, why wouldn't they? Especially since they'd already spoiled the platform with the utterly excellent Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories. The version of Chinatown Wars on PSP was ostensibly the same as the Nintendo DS version, true, albeit with graphics that were a tad improved and the ability to break into cars, dashboards and suitcases using traditional button controls. Even now, all these years on, it's still easily one of the most fascinating games Rockstar has ever released, and it still plays great today via PSP backwards compatibility on PlayStation Vita. This next one is a bit left field, but if the words Little, Kings and Story happen to mean anything to you precisely in that order, well then, it's safe to say you've probably got a good grasp on games. The reason most might not have heard of it is because it was an odd mix of genres, blending real-time strategy, life simulation, and RPG elements all up against the backdrop of a medieval fantasy land. The original Wii version was released in 2009, and a co-development between little-known Japanese devs Sing and Town Factory. But publisher Konami clearly saw something in it when they released it just 3 years later for PlayStation Vita. To their credit, Little King's story definitely feels more suited to a handheld device, not least because as the titular king, Korobo, it's your job to venture out into a top-down world, building and guiding your citizens, all in the effort to expand the kingdom. Doing so involves conquering 7 other rival kingdoms littered throughout the land, all while assigning your followers different jobs. I personally didn't think much of the PlayStation Vita version back when I originally played it, so imagine my surprise when I discovered that the original Wii version comes in at a staggeringly high 87 on Metacritic. Either way, if you're hankering for some Pikmin-esque fun on PlayStation, you now know where to look. Ubisoft is a publisher known for jumping onto new tech and supporting new consoles at launch. However barmy, I've literally never used that word before, their concept and eventual execution might be. The Wii U was absolutely one of those times, and evidence of this again was a respectable little zombie title called ZOMBIU. I wonder how they came up with that. Either way, ZOMBIU offered a unique spin on the undead idea by forcing players to look away at their Wii U gamepad during certain points in missions, placing them at risk of getting unwittingly chomped on. Yum. The Wii U exclusive eventually saw sense, dropped its U branding, and was eventually ported to PlayStation 4 in 2015 simply as Zombie, with an I will say. It retained all the basic hallmarks of the 2012 original, such as a heavy emphasis on melee combat, unique roguelike elements, and a gritty London setting. yet dropped its multiplayer mode and zhushed up the graphics. Zombie on PS4 did lose a dash of its franticness due to the removal of the second screen concept, but you still had to weigh up the risks of knowing when to dip into your backpack in search of supplies. The only difference this time, however, was that you weren't at risk of giving yourself a sore neck. What a win! Sticking with Wii U originals, one of the most recent games to make an exodus to PlayStation 4 by way of a remaster is Platinum Games' Wonderful 101. This entry is extra special too, because the initial 2013 release wasn't published by a third party, say like ZOMBIU or Resident Evil Revelations, but rather Nintendo itself. That might go some way to explaining why this zany action title centered on Power Rangers-esque superheroes took so long to come to other platforms. But it certainly was a surprise when this did happen, with a little help from Kickstarter in May of 2020. The Wonderful 101 might be a wackier title compared to the action-centric triumphs the studio is typically known for, but it's still worth a look on PlayStation 4 for any Platinum's Games fans. You play as protagonist Wonder Red, saving the citizens of Blossom City by commanding the other 100 superheroes from an isometric top-down perspective. The more heroes you gather, the stronger your efforts will be, thus sets the foundation for a different kind of superhero game. It's made even more impressive when you consider that it was you, the fans, that made this remastered PS4 release possible. We've saved the best entry on this list for last, and it is of course none other than Resident Evil 4. Originally announced as part of a project dubbed the Capcom 5, this survival horror classic made its GameCube debut in January 2005. Alongside the world's most questionably themed limited edition controller. How did we let this happen? Soon after its launch, director Shinji Mikami was asked whether players on other platforms would ever get to experience the gooey joys of Leon's Spanish set adventure, to which he famously stated he would, quote, cut his own head off if it ever happened. Cut to just 10 months later, and Resident Evil 4 made its PS2 debut. Awkward. In the years since then, Resident Evil 4 has become a member of an exclusive meme club, joining the likes of Doom and Skyrim for just how many platforms the game has since been ported to. The latest PlayStation example being on PS4 in 2016. But don't worry, despite Capcom being heavily reported to be working on a ground-up remake, the PS5's still early in its life cycle, and there's plenty of time for the Chainsaw Bagman to rage his way onto Sony's next-gen console. Needless to say, if you still haven't played Resident Evil 4, I mean, come on, what are you doing? What do you think of the games emblematic of the rare instances where PlayStation did in fact eat Nintendo's lunch? Let us know in the comments below if you happen to think of any more, but I guarantee you it's not as easy as it sounds. And before I get any Dissolution Diblob fans coming my way, thinking why I didn't mention that game, look it up. Diblob did in fact come to iOS just a tad before the original Nintendo Wii. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, like it if you did, and consider subscribing to the Push Square YouTube channel for everything else PlayStation related. Until next time, I've been Aaron Potter, and I'll see you in the next one.